Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, and today we are going to be taking a minute to step back and recap the first week of action in free agency and in the new league year kicking off. And how better to do that than with a true insider himself from the Athletic Buffalo, Mr. Joe Buscaglia. Joe, how we doing?
I'm doing great, Greg. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to finally come on and chat some Bills with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was talking off the show, you see Matt poking around every once in a while, and I wanted to make sure give you the chance. He's committing adultery on you. So I just wanted to make sure you had the chance to get your shot.
That's hilarious.
Obviously, everybody listening here, I'm sure, is familiar with Joe's work. But if for some reason you're not, at Joe Buscaglia on Twitter, and obviously you see his work at the Athletic Buffalo, has done a really nice lead-up series on positional previews for each of the different areas, guys we can look at, people to be interested in. And today came out with a really good piece breaking down the film of what the Bills really got in Stephon Diggs. So going to be really interesting to talk through there. But why don't we start today just your overall feelings on this first week? More action, less action than what you expected, or is it about lining up with what you anticipated?
Well, from a Bills perspective, I think it's pretty much what I anticipated. The big question about the entire week was what was going to happen with Shaq Lawson. Would he actually get paid? And once they found out the answer was yes, then they moved on in a different direction and in a big way. And I think what became, what became more apparent than anything as they were going along. And I think partially it had to do with how the collective bargaining agreement was structured, but also because of how they interpret what this roster is and what they want it to be, is that they're trying to maximize Josh Allen's rookie window. And I tweeted about it, and I'm sure it's probably on everyone's radar at this point, so it's nothing new. But just the fact that they are going into it and trying to build up their defensive line in a way that they hadn't before, with the likes of Mario Addison, who what I think is an upgrade to Shaq Lawson, maybe not an extreme upgrade, but a slight upgrade to him. They're actually quite similar. He's just a bit more nuanced. And then adding Quentin Jefferson, and then you get Harrison Phillips back. You still have Trent Murphy there, which I know some fans aren't happy with, but I'm sure we'll get into that. But even from there, having A.J. Klein to come in and play the outside linebacker role for probably under 50% of the snaps, and then Josh Norman, they're building up this team around Josh Allen for the next 2 years when they still have the flexibility to do all of these fun, fancy things at all these different positions when they don't have to commit $30+ million a year to the quarterback, or so they hope if Josh Allen hits, because if he doesn't, then they're kind of back at square one. But yeah, it's very apparent that that's what Brandon Beane's after right now.
Well, and I think it goes hand in hand. And, if you're going to make an informed decision on whether to give that monster contract that obviously we're seeing right now everybody get, you need to have all the excuses removed. And I think that's a big piece of what they've done. And we'll get into it as you go through the positions and some of the different things that they've done so far. But I think it's interesting that there aren't any of the $15 and $20 million players, but I have a feeling that by the time this is done, the Bills are going to have the most players in the NFL between 4 and 11 million. And they're doing it through quality depth and quality contributors versus just single superstars. And they're hoping the superstars come from the drafted players, and that eventually the Ed Olivers and Tremaine Edmonds and Trey Whites become those guys. But it's interesting that they actually are doing a ton in the middle. I think you and I had a conversation on Twitter about how big of an impact the minimum increase was going to be. And I was a little shocked that, it's only 7 or 8 guys, because they have so many people just above there and in that middle tier.
Right. So, yeah. And I was going to say, that's a perfect point by you. I mean, they want their stars to come from within, and then they want to pay those guys. I mean, that's how this whole thing is playing out. It's why you're probably going to see a mega deal to Matt Milano, Tre'Davious White, Deion Dawkins. When it comes time, Tremaine Edmonds and Ed Oliver, as long as Oliver continues on the trend he's doing. But yeah, if they can filter in with those middle tier guys that you're talking about, which is exactly how they've attacked this thing outside of Mitch Morse and Star Lotulelei a few years ago. I mean, that is the way Brandon Beane wants to do this thing. And I mean, it's not exactly a poor strategy. I mean, he's quite adept at trying to figure out how to do this thing. And I've been covering this team. This will be my 11th season coming up, and I have seen some pretty poor strategies with how to build rosters over my time, over the short time that I've been covering them for in the grand scheme of things. But it is, they finally have a plan, and it was very evident from day one with what Brandon Beane was all about.
And I like that approach, regardless of, obviously the proof will be in the pudding of how good the plan is. I love the fact that there is a very specific plan. It's something that they are very diligently and intentionally going after, and then there's at least a chance to see that through. So obviously the results have been pretty good so far. So I at least like the fact that there is a set strategy that they're going after. Let's go ahead and dive in right into the positional takeaways. And your article is a perfect lead in. So anybody who hasn't had a chance yet, check it out on the Athletic Buffalo, really in-depth breakdown of what we're getting in Stephon Diggs. And I've kind of flipped in a couple fans, into specifically probably some guys in the chat now. We were talking in the Slack channel, and that I had been adamant about wanting multiple swings at this wide receiver group, and whether that was 2 draft picks and a low price free agent. I was going after that younger tier that you touched on, some of the guys, Tajay Sharp, Geronimo Allison, Demarcus Robinson, Rashard Higgins. And the plan was that, hey, if we do a young free agent and 2 draft picks, maybe one of them could almost turn into a guy as good as Stephon Diggs. Well, now we have that guy, in that it really lessens the need to take multiple swings at it, and the domino effect of inserting a true number 1 to let John Brown now feast on number 2 corners and Cole Beasley only be a 3rd option and Dawson Knox open up the seam. I really think it has a great domino effect. Maybe touch on a few of the takeaways that you liked from putting your piece together that fans can look forward to with what we're getting in Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, I mean, he is really fun to watch. And my position that I think I know more than any other position is wide receiver. I mean, I played a little bit of it growing up, and just knowing some of the techniques going into it. I mean, 6'5", I kind of have to be a wide receiver, right? But when I watch a guy like that move as well as he does, and not just speed, pure speed, it's about quickness of his feet, both in and out of his breaks. And that is something that I harp on to a ridiculous level. And can you win other ways? Absolutely. But if you have that ability to go as fast as you possibly can into that breakdown and then come out of it still at a super high rate, you are putting the defensive back at a disadvantage. And Stephon Diggs does this routinely. I mean, I put a couple of snapshot examples of this. I think he was going up against Kevin King in Green Bay, and bless Kevin King's heart because he tried as hard as he could. But Stephon Diggs, he turned him with the initial release, and by turning him, he had him on a string at that point. So his route was a comeback, and when he hit his breakdown and just completely stomped on the brakes, hit the e-brake right at the top of his route, it sent Kevin King flying. And that to me is just indicative of a guy who he's just in his prime. He's one of the best route runners in the NFL. I feel very comfortable in saying that. And when you have someone that is able to move that quickly and then offer you yards after catch, and then the subtlety to get over the top of a defense without having that elite breakaway speed, this is a really stinking good wide receiver in the NFL. And I mean, he talent-wise, he's probably top 10. Effectiveness-wise, last year he wasn't top 10 because the offense he played in was basically run heavy to Dalvin Cook, and Kirk Cousins didn't really like to throw it down the field a ton, and that was frustrating for him. And you saw him be a bit demonstrative as the season went on.
Ooh, and one of the takeaways I loved in your piece was the idea that obviously we're hoping that Josh Allen builds the anticipatory skills and he's able to read the defense and throw it in there. But in the interim, either whether that does or doesn't develop or not, having a guy like Diggs who can get the cornerback on a string, can have him at his mercy and flash open visually where Josh's arm strength really matters then to fire the ball in there and to be able to get it to him before the DB can break on it is such a great combination, because there's so few guys
Mhm.
in the NFL who can create visual separation. Normally it's the NFL's version of open where you just have a one step lead on them. And when he's able to do that and really roast the guy, that plays perfectly into Josh's strength where he can fire it in there before they can recover. And then ideally you build in further than that, that they get that chemistry, they get that gelling to understand how they're going to be able to come together and then build even further. But I really like that combination in the interim, that he's going to be able to do that. And you touched on it at the opening, that they're capitalizing on this window, and rather than waiting for a first
Mhm.
round pick to develop over the coming years, you're going to have a guy who can be ready to go game one.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have when it's funny because the throwing the window open is the thing, the stark thing that is missing from Josh Allen's game right
Yeah.
now. And I know everyone wants to talk about the downfield accuracy. That I think he can come around and get improve upon that in this coming season, especially within having both Stephon Diggs and John Brown at his arsenal now. Those are two guys that can get down the field and win on those routes. So I think there's going to be a bit of a progression rather than a regression to the mean for him, because I think he's more talented than what he showed specifically in the first half of the season. But it's the anticipatory throws, because I remember a few examples of it last year. I think there was one against Pittsburgh where Cole Beasley was about to flash open into behind a couple of linebackers in zone coverage, and Josh Allen spotted it late. He still completed the pass, but the ball was behind Beasley,
Yeah.
and it ruined any chance for yards after the catch. If he had spotted that and threw the window open, then Beasley is probably running for another good 10, 15, 20 yards. And that was a very close game. And a throw like that could be the difference in one of those games. So that's what's one thing that I would like to see him improve. But like you said, the ability to separate the way that Stephon Diggs does will be his best friend. Now, he will need to learn to throw it with anticipation to Diggs a bit more, because this is a guy who sometimes takes a weird route to get to his route. And we remember that well with Stevie Johnson. It's very similar in that capacity. I think the one thing going for Josh Allen is the fact that Cole Beasley kind of does similar things, only to a lesser degree. But he's going to have to throw it with anticipation, especially when going to the boundary, because when Diggs is going up against better corners like Darius Slay this past year, Byron Jones, Jair Alexander, I mean, those three guys, he had to really work for it on those shorter routes, and the separation wasn't as great against those guys as some others, but he was still able to get it, and they were able to complete those passes because Cousins threw it with anticipation. So that's something that Allen's going to have to work on.
Oh yeah, and it's, obviously now with the cornerback set that you already have in New England and what they're building down in Miami, that's going to be even more of an important piece of it as they get this together. So with the rest of the offense, we haven't seen a lot of other moves to this point. And,
Mm-hmm.
we obviously saw the dalliance the last day or two about the rumors of Melvin Gordon and discussions potentially with Rashard Higgins, and, people throwing out Todd Gurley's name and other pieces with I think Greg Van Roten, the lineman, was talked about at one point. What do you anticipate, if any, from additional free agent moves on the offense? I had thrown out some of the lower tier running backs, maybe a Carlos Hyde, maybe a Devontae Freeman looking for a complimentary role, Peyton Barber out of Tampa Bay. Maybe we invite Laredo and Waddle back, something like that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't expect any big flashes, but maybe some lower level pieces to be added in from a competitive standpoint. What do you think we might see versus what fans are clamoring for out on Twitter?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Either a swing offensive lineman to add some competition and depth, or a running back to be a complementary piece to Devin Singletary. And thank you for not saying my guy, because my guy is Lamar Miller. I love his fit
Nice.
with the Bills,
Some long
and I know
speed.
he's coming off a torn ACL in August. And so this will be 7 months removed. So it might be tough to get him signed just because of the physical aspects with everyone being essentially on lockdown at this point. That part of it will be difficult. So maybe they have to wait a little bit for that. if they were interested in him. But you're talking about a guy who can do a little bit of everything and be the right piece with Singletary. I mean, the number one thing you look for with running backs has to be their vision. And when I watch Carlos Hyde, it's like, wow, this guy can really put his foot in the dirt and get upfield in a hurry, and he make people pay for trying to go low man on him. But with Lamar Miller, he does it in such a smarter approach, and it's not as flashy as a Hyde because he bowls people over, but it's more efficient. And when you're looking for additional yards, especially when Singletary needs a blow, that's what I'm looking for in Lamar Miller. And you get the veteran experience, plenty of starting experience, third down ability. All of these different facets line up to it. And when you add in the fact that Brandon Beane loves himself a productive player coming off an injury.
Certainly a pocket he capitalizes on over and over again.
Exactly. So when you add all of those things into it, it just, to me, Lamar Miller makes so much sense for them if he'd be willing to come to Buffalo.
Well, and I think there's also some informed decision making. Could you talk about Dennis Hickey and Joe Shane, I believe, were in Miami when he got drafted there.
That's
and then
right.
Brian Gain was in Houston when he brought him over from Miami. So you're talking about guys who know what kind of character you're getting, what's left in the tank from coming back from that injury. And then, maybe the delay, everyone is going to be on a delay for physical. So any guys like him are going to be waiting a while anyways, that might fall into their laps to be able to have that opening. If they're already preemptively having those discussions, there's already leadership that have relationships with his agent and have some level of trust. That could be something they could kind of have earmarked to say, hey, when we get around to whenever the heck it is, May, when things get back to, relative normal or whatever the new normal is, that we'll bring him in and do it then. Maybe that's something that we wonder why there's an opening, but is really kind of handshake in place already.
Yeah. I think the point with Joe Shane and Hickey and Brian Gain is completely a perfect one, because they know how he operates. I mean, he started a lot of games in all the organizations that those guys were at before they came to Buffalo. And Shane's got a big voice in that room. And, he's definitely someone that people respect in Orchard Park. Same thing with Brian Gain. These are all good evaluators of talent, and they've worked their way up. And I think you always look for those connections that you talk about, and Miller certainly has that, more so than maybe a Carlos Hyde or Devonta Freeman or some of these other guys.
Well, and I think sometimes fans get a little bit tired of the Carolina connection thing.
Yeah.
And I always try to reference it that it's just removing a piece of risk. It's just more informed decision making. And you brought up a name on the Bills Beat show a couple times that I think it's almost showing the opposite of that effect, that sometimes there's names that you or I might see logic in, like a Devin Funchess, and that all of a sudden you go 2 straight off seasons where he doesn't even have a visit. Sometimes that history can be knowing why not to bring in a player. And that
Right.
It's not always that, hey, every single guy who used to play for me is going to be invited in. Sometimes they also know why not to do that move. It might be why we didn't see Darrell Williams come in. It might be why we didn't see other guys come aboard. And that, yes, obviously Mario Addison, Vernon Butler, some of the names we're about to get to, there's a direct connection there. But it's just more informed decision making, and we'll get to that in the D-line discussion with Eric Washington. But when I have a guy like that vouching for those guys that you're bringing in, who's about to be their position coach, that's certainly reassuring for me when you have those informed decisions being made.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the case of Darrell Williams, I think he didn't get an invite because he can't play anymore. I mean,
it's tough.
He ended up on the ground a lot, and it looked really imbalanced. He didn't really start a ton. It didn't look great, even at guard, when he doesn't have to be athletic. So that was a little bit concerning with him. But it is important to these guys, especially with the culture that they're trying to bring about in Buffalo, and that they're trying to keep going, because they've done a good job at establishing it. And they probably look at Mario Addison like the perfect guy to do it. Then you have Vernon Butler, which is someone that Brandon Beane was part of the group that invested in him with a first-round pick, and they want to see if there's anything left there. And it's essentially a 1-year agreement, because there's not much to that contract past that first year. I think it was like a $1.5 million signing bonus. I can't remember, but
Yeah.
it's the prorated bonus that gets put to the cap in the second year. Not that much. So they're taking calculated risks, calculated swings on these guys to build what they hope will be a rotation to be feared along the defensive line. And if we go back and think about all these different teams in Baltimore's history, right? Like when they just had these defensive linemen on defensive linemen where it's like, wow, how do they just keep adding all of these guys? And I think that's kind of the structure that the Bills are after. Maybe it's not a one hell-raising pass rusher and more of a let's just add as many good players as they can and have them work together to bring down the common goal, and hope in the meantime that Ed Oliver develops into that player from the interior. But I like their approach. And even though the Carolina thing, and fans will be like, oh, what the heck is going on? Which, by the way, they were usurped for their title of team that dipped to the well most by the Detroit Lions with the New England Patriots. But
Miami
yeah,
gave them a decent run too.
They certainly did. They certainly did. So I don't mind the approach whatsoever.
Well, and it's interesting. You brought up Baltimore. I think is a great comp, and I've been using that old Giants Super Bowl team.
Oh
when they
yeah,
had
definitely.
And then the Seahawks in their Super Bowl run,
Mm-hmm.
where both teams had 8 defensive linemen all playing regular snaps and all playing, nobody over 60, everybody over 30, and just constantly rotating in. I wouldn't mind if Ed Oliver snuck above there, but anybody else, I'm fine.
Same.
If everybody else is just doing your 50-50 part. And a couple guys in the Slack channel were like, oh man, are you sure it's not too big of a downgrade by losing Shaq and Jordan Phillips? I said, whoa, we just got Mario Addison, Quentin Jefferson, and Vernon Butler. We just upgraded in that. I know when it's not the Von Millers and Khalil Macks and Aaron Donalds of the world, the nuance of who's a good defensive lineman is kind of tough. So you get used to the names on your own team. Quentin Jefferson's a stud. And is a guy who consistently won his one-on-one battles at all 4 spots across the defensive line. And that's a great versatile piece. And now pushing, to where Jerry Hughes can play a high leverage 50% of snaps. Trent Murphy can maybe play a high leverage 40% of snaps, and you're not depending on them to be the only piece because you now also have Mario Addison. You have Quentin Jefferson outside on rundowns and then kicking in next to Ed Oliver on third downs, and Vernon Butler coming in to keep them both fresh. And that's counting nothing from Starr and Harrison Phillips, and assuming Daryl Johnson doesn't even make the roster and no draft pick. They're already 9-10 defensive linemen deep, to where some of those picks that fans are upset that we gave up a large package for Stephon Diggs. I agreed with you that I think we paid the appropriate amount, but all of a sudden one of those Wyatt Teller last minute Russell Bodine deals, we'd trade off one or two of those guys and recoup a couple of those picks. So I like the idea of the 8-man rotation, and then you hope you stumble onto Ed Oliver being the problem child amongst the group that just wreaks havoc on his own.
Yeah, and that was definitely a problem for Sean McDermott last year because he didn't have the rotation that he wanted, because Daryl Johnson by, I think, week 6 just deemed himself totally unplayable because teams just kept taking advantage of him on the edge as a run defender. And, you just can't have that. You just can't be pinned inside as much as he was. And that's why he had, I think, something like 18 snaps the rest of the way outside of week 17. So that's a reason why they're looking to upgrade. And just because they did all of these things and added a Quentin Jefferson, Mario Addison, and Vernon Butler, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're out of the realm of adding a pass rusher in the draft, because basically they could just swap Trent Murphy for that young pass rusher if they really wanted to. But that decision doesn't have to be made yet. It's pretty much very simple at this point. So, I think the rotation aspect of it, and I know fans probably looked at Jordan Phillips and went, 9.5 sacks, but he was a very limited player, if we're being honest. And the 9.5 sacks were great. And there were times where he looked like he really had a bug on his behind, and he got up the field in a hurry. But there were other times where he was just there, just a guy. And I actually liked, and I know some fans will be surprised by this, but Ed Oliver is a better run defender than Jordan Phillips is. Yeah. And it's not particularly close in my mind. The push that Ed Oliver gets, how he's able to withstand the push from the offensive lineman, even on double teams, and stand his ground, is superior to what Jordan Phillips does. It's the reason why I didn't understand why Phillips was starting all those games, but maybe they were just trying to bring the rookie along slowly and get him in a mindset where it's like, okay, nothing is guaranteed, knowing the fact that next season they're going to need him in a big way.
Well, and so it's hard. I always try to be even-handed with Jordan Phillips, and that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the guesswork that he did, and I do think some of it was guesswork, results in that awesome goal line sack that he had against
Mm-hmm.
Miami. That was the
Yes.
play before the Trey White pick, where he really helped create that in a game that was getting away from us. There were also an awful lot of those in the Eagles game where he was guessing, and the huge gashed run lane that they ran
Yeah.
through was because he
Yep.
also guessed and guessed
Yep.
wrong on that one. And it's that inconsistency is tough in a defense that's so predicated on the cliche of the 111th. That's real. Like, you need
Mm-hmm.
everybody to do their job, and if they do, you see what the results are. When you have a guy that freelances and guesses and tries for the flash play, it's cool on the 2 or 3 where he hits home. You just don't realize that he whiffed on 10 or 12 of them to get that 2 or 3 that were
Yeah.
there. And I think that having somebody more consistent who can do their role well might not get. I don't know that Quentin Jefferson or Vernon Butler are going to get 9.5 sacks, but I think that we can get that production overall by the group that's there without
Mhm.
losing anything and increasing significantly on the run defense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And of course, Harrison Phillips is a big part in this because he can kind of flip between both one tech and three tech, which is good for them. I still need to dig hard into the Quentin Jefferson stuff and the Vernon Butler stuff. I liked Butler a lot coming out of Louisiana Tech for what it's worth. I just haven't watched a lick of him
Yeah.
since. So, but that's my plan kind of next week to watch all those guys and see exactly how they might use them after knowing what McDermott likes to do. But yeah, that's having that many players that can get up the field and rush the quarterback. That is a major asset for Sean McDermott and what he likes to do defensively. But this is all underscoring the point that, like, okay, you can stop him, but you also gotta score the dang ball too.
Yeah, and I thought you brought up a good point on Trent Murphy that I'd been trying to kind of talk through, and there's two sides of it. One, we don't need to cut him. We're right at the
Mm-hmm.
threshold right now. There's a lot of contracts coming off the books after this season that create about 40 million in cap space. That
Mm-hmm.
literally, in my opinion, the only one that's on there that I'd want back is John Feliciano. Everybody else is probably replaceable, and it nets out almost exactly what you're going to see in the contract extensions already with Poyer and what I anticipate we see with Milano and Dawkins, and then how they handle the at minimum, like next year be the 5th-year option for Trey, hopefully
Mm-hmm.
alongside a longer extension as well. So those kind of net out. We don't need to make a move. Now, if we get to draft day and all of a sudden a Josh Uche or Yetur Gross-Matos or Zach Bond or Jabari Zuniga or Daryl Taylor, or whoever they like, whoever the Bills like at pass rush, if all of a sudden that's the pick at 54, we also just saw 2 teams make moves for what were deemed untradeable contracts, and the Jags got compensation for Nick Foles' contract. Heck,
Mm-hmm.
the Texans paid for David Johnson as part of the DeAndre Hopkins package, and we've seen some of the incredible deals that Bean has pulled off. I don't think it's crazy that he could get a team desperate for a pass rusher to give, say on day 2, we make that pick. Going into day 3 that morning, you could see Trent Murphy moved for an extra day 3 pick. And all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
we get back one of those 5th rounders we gave up for Stephon Diggs.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, say it's Bryce Hall or Michael Ojemudia or Damon Arnett, and we go cornerback in round 2, all of a sudden, hey, we still have a really high-end 4th defensive end that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think fans would feel better if we were paying Trent Murphy $5 million instead of $10 million. But I always try to caution that there's a huge gap between, hey, I wish we weren't quite paying this guy that much, and hey, this guy's a bum and not going to be in the NFL. If we release Trent Murphy, he's going to be unemployed for a day or 2.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
an NFL caliber player, and that,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'd feel better if it was restructured or something, but he's worthy of being on the roster and better than Daryl Johnson.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, it's smart business, right? I mean, you look at Brandon Bean, and he's not going to look at an asset and go, I'm just going to cut that just to
Yeah.
cut that. That's not how he operates. It's not how he's gotten to the point where he's at this moment. So for Trent Murphy, he's still an asset in his mind. He's on an expiring contract, which is a very attractive thing to teams. Um, Basically, all he is costing them at this point is $500,000 on additionally on the cap in the next day or two. From that point, they can still save under $8 million to unload him and release him just before the season. There's no other commitment to him than that. So why not take him to camp? Even if you draft a pass rusher, why not bring him through the preseason? See if he might spark something, make some plays in the preseason. Team looking for a pass rushing booster, have a couple of injuries to the defensive end room. Maybe they get desperate, like you're talking about, and deal a 5th or 6th round pick for him, which is another pick that you didn't have just by hanging on to the guy and swallowing a $500,000 roster bonus. It's smart business, and that's why I would be somewhat surprised if they released Trent Murphy at this point. If they were to go out there and gotten a guy like, I don't know, a Robert Quinn or something like that, then maybe I could see them moving on. But this is still a good run defender in Trent Murphy, signed to the last year of his deal. He's not a good pass rusher. He's probably average. Depending more on the people around him to win as opposed to him winning on every single rep. There are some different situations where he can win, but it's not like he's speed off the edge or anything. And I think that's where fans are kind of struggling with, because you want this defensive end who is like their marquee signing beside Star Latulele a couple years ago to be this pass rusher that you expect. And because he had a high number of sacks 2 years before that, people are like, all right, well, this is the guy, and that he hasn't lived up to that has been disappointing. But that said, I mean, he's still a quality role player. And at this point, his contract is middle tier to low middle tier. And you could do a lot worse than having him as your 3rd or 4th defensive end.
Well, and there's a perfect parallel last year. Let's say we don't get an obvious guy at 54. Let's say it's a little bit later. I like Jabari Zuniga out of Florida, or Alex Highsmith out of Charlotte, and it's a 4th or 5th
Me
round pick,
too.
something like that. Well, you have the Devin Singletary, LaShawn McCoy parallel that you made that draft pick. I don't think going into camp that it was that obvious for Bean and McDermott. And then during camp, Singletary made it apparent that, hey, we're going to be okay if we move on. They could do that same thing and look and say, hey, maybe Daryl Johnson takes a material step forward. Maybe Alex Highsmith shows up and is ready to go day one, and he can be a 4th defensive end in an NFL caliber rotation. Then all of a sudden, you get to cut down day. You posture just like Brandon Bean did with LaShawn McCoy last year and say all the right things and wait till the very last minute to try to extract any final moment of value from it. And if they don't, you make the cut down then, because it doesn't cost you any more money to wait and to leverage that as much as possible. I think that's much more likely than the people who are clamoring for, no, cut him today, we want the cap space. Well, the cap space is the same today as it is August 31st. So, or after the 500K. But I think that risk is worth trying to extract some value.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's having, unless they are totally strapped against it, like they agree to 3 extensions back to back to back. At that point, if you need it, then do it. But if that doesn't happen, like I'm not anticipating Trey White to sign to a long-term extension while he still has a couple of years to watch the market go up. And the fact that it's already at like 16 and a half, 17 mil for top end corners, that's only going to go up. So it might get to 20 by the time they get to that deal.
The waiting game between the agents of Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Lattimore, Jalen Ramsey, and Trey White are going to be very interesting, because they're all going to be waiting to be the last one to one up each other by $250,000 each. It'll be interesting to see when the first trigger gets pulled there. But let's move on to the next position group that I actually think are the least known to fans, because I don't know that a lot of fans had either AJ Klein or Tyler Matakevich on their radar as players. AJ Klein is a starting caliber linebacker who started 60-70% of snaps for a playoff caliber defense in the Saints the last couple of years, and previously was in a little bit more of a rotational role in the Carolina before that. Matakevich is a special teams demon and led the NFL in special teams tackles last year and the most over the last 4 years, but actually stepped in and started about 2/3 of the season the year that the terrible Ryan Shazier injury happened. So has some ability to step in there. And I know a lot of fans were always kind of asking, hey, how are we going to replace Zoe? Well, you're not really going to know one guy is going to, but when you take a Quentin Jefferson's versatility on the D-line, Matakevich's ability on special teams, and AJ Klein at strong side linebacker, all of a sudden those three guys can cobble together all the snaps you were getting there. And I actually think those are the nice luxury plays that we're not rolling the dice that Victor Dodson is some UDFA find or that we're plugging in some minimum salary guy. We have two legitimate NFL caliber guys to play, and also some legitimate depth if, God forbid something happens to Milano or Tremaine Edmonds. I actually thought those were sneaky deals for what some fans are like, oh man, why are we paying that much for a guy who only plays 25% of snaps? I actually think it's a nice luxury of what that pocket of value we have before all these extensions kick in.
Yeah, the depth point is the right one here, because after Edmonds and Milano last year, there wasn't a lot to speak of, and they were fairly fortunate that those guys did not get injured, because otherwise it would have been relying on Julian Stanford or Corey Thompson. And while those guys were nice special teamers, they're not solid defenders. Even putting Lorenzo Alexander into the one of the two linebacker roles in a nickel, that's not great because he couldn't move really that well last year.
He can still rush the passer, but he couldn't do it in space anymore.
No. That was beyond him at that point, and he knew it too. So when you have some depth now with Klein, that he can step into either one of those roles and be able to bail you out there a little bit, that's good. And that's not, his contract isn't one where I kind of relate it to the Tyler Kroft one last year. Like it's not an incredible deal, but it's substantial enough to where you're compensating a player to start if he earns it. I don't think AJ Klein is absolutely dead set the starting outside linebacker in the base formation. I mean, if Voshan Joseph actually puts together a good training camp, then maybe he does it. I'm not ruling out 54 being a spot that they look at an outside linebacker in more of a Zoe role. I know you brought up Zach Bond. He'd be perfect for that. I don't know if he's going to get to 54, but he'd be great for that. The guy that I love, I would be shocked if he's there at 54, but the fact that he only had 1 year of production, Terrell Lewis from Bama. I mean, I think he would be perfect for that role because how well he can move in space. But I think at this point, they're providing themselves a base, and that's smart because you don't want to go into a season, especially when you want to contend for not only the AFC East but potentially even the AFC. That you don't want to go into it with an unpracticed hand at a pretty significant position, or even the depth as well. So I think having all of those guys working together against each other, compete with each other, and having that solid baseline if something happens to one of those top two guys is a very smart thing.
Think about the luxury that we're in now, that just a few years back we're talking about needing Ramon Humber to have a starting spot to be able to hold back the 5th round pick of Matt Milano.
Think he liked me.
Imagine if it was AJ Klein holding back 2nd round pick Terrell Lewis. It's just crazy where we've come in this roster build.
I know. Yeah. Absolutely.
The last position group we haven't got to here is one that I can't lie is probably the one I'm the most interested in or semi-concerned with, in that the only addition we've seen so far is basically swapping Josh Norman in for Kevin Johnson, who signed with Cleveland yesterday. I think during the show here, the official news broke about Dean Marlowe coming back, but I always assumed he was going to be back. He's the roster cockroach that you can't kill. He the man has found a way to survive.
He's the Felton Huggins.
Yeah, just forever. He's always going to hold on. But I can't lie. I've talked myself into the combination of the bad scheme and the losing culture in Washington, and now surrounded by what I think is the best coverage back seven in the NFL, being around him, we can salvage value from Josh Norman. I think having the baseline safety net of Levi Wallace means that if he does completely lose it, we still have something there.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping to come into the season and upgrade from Kevin Johnson and Trey White, or opposite Trey White with Levi Wallace, and the draft could still do that. If we get Bryce Hall, we get Ojemudia, you see, hey, we have a reason to go after Diggs now to be able to welcome his brother. That I think there's still a shot there, but that's one spot where I was a little surprised that we've only seen Josh Norman so far. Is there anything that intrigued you with names out there, or any surprise of what we've done in the DB market so far?
Well, honestly, I took cornerback off because I had a list of positions I was going to write about, and I took cornerback off the list once they got Josh Norman, because I thought to myself, okay, well, they're going to have him compete for a starting job, and they
The contract says
promise.
they will.
Yeah, they're not going to promise him anything less than that. I think there is a chance that they take a cornerback in the first few rounds, which would be the second, third, or fourth round. A guy that, you know, kind of sticks out to me that has everything that they want is Harrison Hand out of Temple. I mean,
Okay.
a taller guy, long arms, can tackle really well. I wonder if that might be someone they look to develop on day 3 at some point. But it is a slight concern, but they do really think that Josh Norman can benefit from being back with McDermott. And that, to me, I don't know if it's foolhardy. After going through and watching Norman's film, I was a lot more optimistic about it than I was going in, because the preconceived notion was, oh, he's getting burned every single play, all of this. And it's like, well, that's not really based in reality, because there are quite a few times where he got left on an island when the free safety just played a hunch, or the middle linebacker that had only, I think, 0 starts to his name at the time was playing a hunch and came down to a deep cross. And, you know, he was playing outside technique and he has to cover for a deep post down the middle of the field. That's unfair to him at that point, when there should be a player there. So I think all in all, him not going up against that top target like you talked about, Micah Hyde's going to be his best friend, because Hyde is one of the most discouraging deep ball free safeties in the NFL. Because he's a center fielder back there. That's what he does. He's very smart. So all of these things will help
predator.
him.
You have an 8-foot wingspan predator in the middle of the field covering.
Exactly. That helps things too. So I'm cautiously optimistic about it, but I'm also not out on Levi Wallace. I think he played a lot better than people thought he did, and he had a really bad game against the Browns. But he played really well for a lot of the season, and he's got all of the characteristics that they like in their corners too.
Well, there was a good question in the chat here about, you know, how much you would blitz around a guy like Norman versus zone and man. And I don't know that it discourages the blitz as much as you obviously are going to be very conscious of not letting the team isolate Norman and man. I think the Bills disguise coverage as well as any defensive backfield in the NFL. So I actually think there's some positive to having him trail, having it look like he's in man when it's actually just disguised zone. I think they did that a ton last year, where they would do a false trail and make it look like they were following along and give the quarterback the key that it was man. And then all of a sudden they would just drop back into a new zone, and they were just so comfortable together. And when every other piece of the back seven is returning from the previous year, you have such clean communication, and having a veteran coming back into the same system who knows the game well enough. I think that we can either salvage it, or we can know quick enough that it's got to go to Levi. But I think that the baseline safety net is better than what fans think.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's at least something to hang your hat on with that. I think the one area that maybe they could look to address even still is at nickel, because Taron Johnson is nice and he's a good player when he's healthy. But that's kind of a big detracting statement there, because he has not been available as much as they would have wanted. And he's a little bit of a slighter build. And when you have someone that is playing that much of an important position on your team, because they're in nickel more often than they're in base.
Oh yeah.
When you have that player potentially not being available to you, that's tough. So I think if you look at someone that can play that Buffalo role, the big nickel, that actually has the athletic skill set to even chip in as the regular nickel. I mean, that's something that they might target in the second or third round in the draft. So Johnson doesn't have an immediate competitor right now, but I think there's a pretty good chance that he will have one by the time we get to training camp.
Wait, there was a name that I had tracked earlier, and I think you might have referenced him in one of your pieces. Darryl Worley is a guy who was
Oh
in
yeah.
Carolina, went out
Hmm.
to the Raiders, is a nickel that you could bring him in on a minimum-ish deal to compete
Hmm.
and just to be almost an EJ Gaines, Captain Munnerlin kind of guy. Like, hey, you better step up because we got this guy here too. You could see that kind of level, but I do think
Hmm.
that's still very much in play at 54. Is that
Hmm.
that Buffalo nickel, and whether that's, Kyle Duggar making it there, Jeremy Chin making it there later on in the draft, Tanner Muse out of
Hmm.
Clemson. I think those are the kind of guys that, hey, are they a weak side linebacker? Are they a safety? Are they a nickel? They have the movement skills to keep up in coverage. They can take on a tight end man to man. That kind of piece has been missing. They took a swing at it at Saran Neal, and I think he has value, but I don't think he's that piece. Dean
Hmm.
Marlowe has plugged in there better than most have expected. They've tried it with different packages to be able to do that. They kind of had Kurt Coleman as just a veteran presence there. But I think that taking a significant investment at that spot also minimizes exposure of an AJ Klein or Boshawn Joseph or that third linebacker, because you can almost replicate your version of base defense when that third guy is, hey, Jeremy Chin's 6'2", 230. I mean,
Hmm.
that's bigger than Matt Milano, let alone, or maybe not Matt Milano now that I've seen his biceps on Instagram, but rookie year, Matt Milano, he's bigger than that.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that could still be in play as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think they wanted so badly for Saran Neal to be that guy,
Yeah.
and it's not in the cards for him. To be honest, I actually like Saran Neal better at boundary corner than I
I
did
would
at nickel.
the game that he got forced out there, I was terrified. I was like, oh, not bad.
He looked pretty good. He moves very fluidly, and I was kind of surprised how quick he moved his hips and on his drops. And I'm like, okay, Saran, I see you. I don't know if they'll do it full time, but I think it's at least gives him an option. He's going to be on this roster either way because
His
he's one of
special
their
teams is great.
yeah, he's one of their top guys at that. So, but because he hasn't panned out with that, and he's now in his third season, they go from hopeful to no longer being able to count on him to be a part of that. So they have to plan accordingly otherwise. So which is why right in that 54 range, Kyle Duggar is someone that we've talked about a lot that would be a perfect fit for it. I still need to watch Chin a little bit more. I hear him referenced all the time. So once we get out of the free agency mold, I'm going to hit more draft prospects really hard. But yeah, that is a need that they need to look at some point.
So we've gone through each of the positions here. I know you threw out Lamar Miller. I had mentioned Carlos Hyde. I know some connection with Rashard Higgins, Greg Van Roten. Do you expect there to be any other names here in the immediate future? I know last year we saw trickling signings for months throughout the
Mm-hmm.
year as they, eventually brought in Quentin Spain and later on with the EJ Gaines and Captain Munnerlin. Do you think we see anything here over the next week?
Um, Running back would be my best guess, or a swing offensive lineman that can play both guard and tackle. I think that's the guy that I liked for them just got scooped up by Tampa Bay, Joe Haig.
Yeah, just
Um,
earlier today.
so he had the history with Bobby Johnson. It was a really cheap deal too. I think it was 1 year, 2.3. So that was a good value signing by them. But yeah, something along those lines where they help build up the depth of the offense a little bit, because they do need that. I think when you go into the season only having TJ Yeldon as your primary veteran ball carrier behind Devin Singletary, that's a bit of a problem because you can't trust him. And they proved that they didn't trust him by not making him active at all, even when Frank Gore looked like he couldn't play anymore. And Gore had a great career. Don't get me wrong, a great first half of the season. Second half of the season, that got bad.
Yeah.
So the fact that Yeldon couldn't get on the field during that, that leads me to believe that they're looking for an upgrade. And so I wouldn't be surprised within the next week. And of course, Brandon Beane's going to keep his ear to the ground as the offseason goes for like a Quinton Spain, where guys that kind of fall between the cracks and
just too good of a value to pass up.
Yeah, exactly. On a 1 year prove it. So that those type of things wouldn't surprise me.
One name I forgot to mention that just came loose. History with Brian Daboll's offense, can probably play the TJ Yeldon role and be a bit of an upgrade there, but be a more dependable ball carrier. Dion Lewis is a name to keep track of that I could see him being a guy that, hey, you already know the offense. You can be that pass catching guy. You're more trustworthy when you're handing the ball and in pass protection. That's a name that if they go, say they go the AJ Dillon route or something in the draft and try to snag him in a little bit later, a bigger, heftier guy, I could see a Devin Singletary, AJ Dillon, Dion Lewis backfield being pretty effective.
Yeah. The only thing that worries me about Lewis is, can he play anymore? Because Tennessee did not put him on the field at all. I mean, I know Derrick Henry turned into Derrick Henry, but
it's tough to gauge how much was which.
Yeah. So that's, and I know he's a little bit up there in age as well. But that's kind of the realm that we're talking about here with a backup veteran running back at this point, which is why I kind of like the idea of Lamar Miller, because he still had some juice the last time we saw him. And it's a matter of coming back from a torn ACL, which is a lot easier of a feat than it used to be. But still, it's a calculated risk nonetheless.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. I know it's been an interesting new world for everybody. So the last couple of shows, I've gone this same path each time that, people come to shows like this and to your work at The Athletic to get away from the realities of the world. And from more and more information that's coming out, it sounds like we're going to be in this new world for a while.
Yeah.
So I just ask everybody to be considerate, think of each other, check in on your neighbors, check in on your family, try to be thoughtful and be careful with each other and be safe to take care of each other. So appreciate you taking the time for us today. And it seems like this is the only respite we're going to get for a while, is having something to talk about outside of the craziness of the world.
Absolutely. Thank goodness for free agency, for the distraction for all of us. It's been great. I mean, I didn't know I was going to spend 3 days of my life watching Stephon Diggs, but here we are. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a blast, and to interact with everybody out there. It's cool to know that there's like a community around complete nerds with football, even the financial part of it. And that we're all kind of like coming together at a time like this. It's a pretty unique thing and very humbling all at the same time.
Appreciate it very much. I'm going to hold you to it. I'm going to have you back on again, and we'll go through what comp pick bingo really means for some of the fans, so we can get excited as we see some of these contracts shake out. But thanks for your time today.
I'm all the way in, Greg. Thanks so much, man.
Appreciate it. Check out Joe's work at Joe Buscaglia on Twitter, at The Athletic Buffalo. Check out everything he's got going on. Just released an awesome piece on the details of Stephon Diggs just a couple hours ago. Going to be worth your time. Thank you for joining everybody today. The chat was awesome. Appreciate all you guys. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.